session continues our discussion on damage assessments with a specific focus on media this time. So we're going to actually bring in some experts. We're not always good about doing that in the Weather Service, but we've learned our lesson. Our guest speakers today are Keli Pyrtle and Megan Taylor. Keli Pyrtle is a public affairs specialist for the NOAA Comms office. She's stationed in Norman and supports all 5 NOAA organizations from Norman, including the Storm Prediction Center and the National Severe Storms Lab. Megan Taylor, many of us know as a master instructor of the National Weather Service Training Center in Kansas City. She's the lead instructor for online IDSS and media training. So to get us started, Megan has a few logistics to go over.
Thanks, Keli. We are super excited to be here today. Keli Pyrtle and I never get to work together, so when we were approached with this, I think we both did some cheering because this is a topic that we love and we get to work together. So we're excited to be here today. I'm going to cover a few of the logistics to start us off. So Keli, I'll have you go back to the previous slide just in case some of our people missed it logging in. So we will have you go ahead and just mute your microphones and your cameras. We've found that with bigger groups, if we mute our cameras, there's a few less technical issues. So go ahead and just mute those cameras. And again, if we are recording, so when we get to some discussion points, if you don't want to turn your camera back on, that's totally fine with us. We really get that. And with Zoom burnout, sometimes it's just really hard to be on camera for this long. So cameras off, microphones off. We will have opportunities for discussion. When we get to those points, we will ask you to use the raise hand button, which is at the bottom part of your screen. And then we'll call on you based on who has raised their hand. So we don't have the awkward talking over each other moment. We have a couple of troubleshooting things that are up on this slide. Sometimes Google is weird, and I have found, honestly, if you just log out and log back in, that fixes a lot of problems. But if you are, stuck and you can't figure out what's going wrong, throw something in chat and hopefully somebody can jump in and help you troubleshoot a little bit. We're going to use a lot of Google Meet features. So first of all, we are going to use the Q&A panel to put in questions as you have them. We will have poignant pauses where we talk about questions and answer some of these. So this will be great if you could just put your questions in the Q&A panel. You get to that by going to the triangle, square, circle button that's in the upper right corner of your screen, then click Q&A. If someone's already typed your question in, just hit the thumbs up button. That lets us know that we really need to address that question. If you have a comment and not a question, throw that in chat. I already see some people talking about what they want to learn about today. That's awesome. We will also use polls. So at different times throughout our presentation, we're going to throw a poll up there and we'll ask you to quickly go over and click on the poll, answer a question for us. You'll see a pop-up at the bottom of your screen, or you can go right back to that triangle, circle, square button, then click polls and you can answer the poll. Lastly, we are going to try breakout rooms. This is a pretty big group, but we are going to attempt to do breakout rooms to make this more interactive for you all so you can get more out of this. I will tell you how that's going to work when we get to the component in this session that we're going to use the breakout rooms. And with that, we're also going to try Jamboard, which is an online whiteboard tool. So lots of new stuff today. I think that's all I have for logistics. So I'm going to pass it over to Keli Pyrtle.
All right, always hard to find that unmute button. So we'll go to the next slide. And hi, everybody. We're just so excited to be doing this with you. And what you've already put in the chat box are really good things you want to learn. That just makes me more excited and a little challenged in a good way. So to get us started, though, we want to ask you to click on the activities button, which is in the upper right corner, and it looks like a triangle, square, and circle icon. And Megan is launching a poll. So click the polls button and answer the question while I talk more about today's session, please. So the poll question is, have you talked with or run into a reporter during a storm survey? So we're very curious to know about that. Our objectives today are pretty simple, really. We want to talk about what you want to know. That's the #1 objective. And then we also want to talk about skills and best practices to succeed at working with the media out in the field. We thought we would also talk about strategies for interview requests during damage surveys, because I know you've all dealt with those before. And then we threw in news conferences, best practices for news conferences, because news conferences tend to go hand in hand with big tornado events. And then we want to review general interview tips, although I know most of you all are experienced at that. It's always good to remember a few things. So we also want to talk about actually, I think we want to go. Megan, did you want to close the poll? Do you have enough answers?
Yep, it is closed now.
Okay. So what are the poll results?
It looks like we have 45 votes for yes for running into a reporter during a damage survey, 9 votes for no, and 2 I don't remember. This must have been a busy damage survey.
Yeah, aren't they all? So yeah. Okay, cool. Well, first, I always like to talk about the big picture. Why are we even bothering, right? Why don't we just tell them all, no, get away, leave us alone? And we don't do that because they provide valuable information to the public and they have a job to do, and we want to help them do their job. Also branding, it's good awareness for NOAA and the National Weather Service. We are the official source. They can't get some of this information from anyone else but us, right? And we have a responsibility to the people who pay taxes, and we pay taxes too, but we have a responsibility for providing information about the important work we do. And there is a right to know. There's a right for journalists to ask questions. And when a journalist is doing their job well, they are representing the public, and we can get information to the public through them. And our goal really is to help the reporters do their job and still do our job. And that's the balance. And we're going to talk a lot today about balance and when they ask and how you can respond. And I know it surprises people, but I tell people a lot, you can say no. So it's important to establish trust, and trust can really help that relationship. I know you all have a lot of relationships with reporters in your CWA. So sometimes that trust can really make a difference in your interactions. Okay, go to the next slide. And why is weather news? It's pretty obvious, right? It affects everybody. It can be deadly, right? It can be destructive, just like this picture. So first thing we want to talk about is before you leave the office, right? The best way we believe to have a successful interaction with a reporter is to be prepared. I think that was one of the concerns, right? How to feel calm. Yeah. I'm not sure we're going to help you feel completely calm, but we want to help you feel better prepared. So think about what you will say in advance. What is the most important thing that people that you serve want to know? It's helpful to anticipate the questions that reporters will ask. They're coming to you as the expert, right? So it's pretty clear usually what they want to know. What is the historical context? What's the rating? What happened? Why was there no warning, right? That's also one of the concerns that I saw. So especially after an event, talking points can help everyone say the same thing and be consistent. So if one person in your office sits down and comes up with a talking points document and starts thinking about those questions and looks up, well, this was the third most tornadoes we've had in April since 1990, right? Put that in the talking points document, then everybody can talk from the same page and nobody else has to look that up. What if you missed your warning? Well, one person can write what happened. and I do want to address that for missed warning, talking points for missed warnings. We can talk about this more later if we need to, but I think the best way is to be honest and be very clear about what your office did and what you didn't do and why you didn't do it. Usually there's a reason, and people understand that our science is still limited, and emphasize that your office is doing the best they can and how dedicated your office is, because I know each of your offices are so dedicated, and say we were monitoring. It's not like we were sleeping on the job, which is kind of the government perception sometimes, but we were monitoring, and it was a rapid spin up, or give a reason. So once one person though has answered that everybody can use that, right? So, and you might already do this, but we suggest having a dedicated person in the office to answer calls that come in. So if the WCM is doing the storm survey, take some of the pressure off of you as a WCM or a SU or an MIC or whatever, and delegate that responsibility and avoid managing those calls while you're out in the field. So talking points can help with that, right? So before you leave the office, you have the same information that people in the office have. All right, Megan's going to launch poll number 2. Let's do another poll. Back to the activities button and click the poll option. For this poll, tell me whether you develop talking points before you leave the office for a damage assessment. Probably a lot of you have already done this.
The results are coming in. We'll give just a few seconds for everyone to click on the poll and answer. Okay, it looks like we have most of our answers in. I've started to see the numbers slowing down here. So
Okay.
It looks like we have a few votes for always. Most of the votes went to sometimes, and we do have a few that admitted that they rarely make talking points before going out on a survey.
Yeah. Well, when we're in discussion, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that. It just seems like that is, once one person sits down and does the work, then it's available to everyone. And I have on my phone, I have Google Docs on my phone, so I can look at talking points. And so even somebody in the office, if they figure out, maybe there's multiple teams out in the field, so one team has some information, rather than just texting each other and stuff, you can add it to the Google Doc, and then everybody has that information, right? Now I think we're going to Megan, and we'll go to the next slide.
Thank you. Okay, so we sort of set the ground rules here and talked about talking points, and that we feel it's very important. So now let's talk about what you do when you actually get out to do the damage assessment and there's media present. So it does look like several of you have run into the media when you were out there, based on the poll that we did first. And this could go a few different ways. So we're going to present you with a few options of how to handle this when you run into the media. And the first one is, some press is going to say, hey, can I follow you around while you do your damage assessment? And I'm not going to say, no, you can't do this. If you feel comfortable, you have a great relationship, that's your call. But definitely set ground rules if you agree to do this. You want to let them know what's on the table, what you absolutely can't or won't do. That might even be like, hey, we can't give you a rating right now because we're clearly conducting our damage assessment. We don't know. Let them know what you're able to talk about and what you can provide with that, and be aware of what is around you. You get there pretty early in the process of assessing the damage and cleaning up. There could be people being pulled out of houses. There could be all sorts of things going on around you. So you definitely don't want to stop and jump in front of a camera or start an interview if people behind you are doing things that shouldn't be on camera. So situational awareness is very important. But I am going to say, and we'll head to the next slide, this may not be the best way to approach this, having them follow you while you do your damage assessment. And here's some reasons why. First of all, it's going to take longer. If you have more people in tow and they're hauling equipment around, or you're waiting for them to take pictures if they're like from the newspaper, it's going to take a little longer to get done what you need to get done. You're also going to put some risk out there for having one media outlet getting a scoop on the story or getting more information before the others if they're the ones you encountered first and they asked to follow you around. We definitely want to do the best we can to give all of our media partners equal opportunities to get information at the same time. So that's a little tricky when you have just like one outlet following you around. And of course, if you add everyone, it's going to take longer. You do also risk shutting down that survivor Q&A, which is obviously very important when you're trying to assess the situation. But if you show up with reporters, especially if they have big cameras on their shoulders and they're walking around with you, they may not want to talk to you because they may be afraid of being on camera, or they may be very personal or have things about their life they don't want reported on. And then the last component is you talk a lot about the integrity of houses and structures as part of your damage assessment. And I don't know, but if it was me and I'm a homeowner, I just lost a whole bunch of things, and I find later on the 5 o'clock news that the weather service person is talking about how my house wasn't built well, I think I'd be pretty angry. Like I would be pretty upset with the weather service. So you have to think about whether or not you want to have some of these conversations with the media around. So we do have a few reasons why having them just follow you straight out as you assess may not be the best option. Let's move to the next slide. So what do you do instead? Well, first of all, there are some media outlets that you can just tell them, like Keli said, it's okay to tell them, no, we can't do interviews right now. We can't, have you follow us around, but we will give you the way we are going to announce this rating. So that way everyone can get the same information at the same time. And this might be, we use P&S statements, we use social media, there's a few different ways you can do this. So some media will be pretty flexible. The other thing is you can just take one-on-one interviews as you encounter the media partners. At least this way, you get them knocked out, that you're not waiting for anyone. But again, you need to set ground rules because they're probably going to want to know what the rating is before you know the answer, before you're ready to release the answer. And if they're videoing you, you have to know what's going around you. I actually saw an interview one time, and it was after a tornado and there was damage, and I can't remember what state it was in, but there was an interview happening. The reporter was talking to the person in front of this former location of a home, and there's this rubble. And in the background, there's this man. He was probably middle-aged, getting closer to seniors, and he clearly had lost everything. And he's picking up his life that he could salvage from the rubble, and he's just crying hysterically, like he's just so broken. And this is happening behind this interview. And I felt like, man, that is an awful thing for this person to have to go through this and then have these emotions broadcast on television. And so we definitely don't want to put our community in that situation. So you definitely need to be aware of what's happening around you. The reporter should be good at this, but sometimes, it's better to have two sets of eyes and two people thinking about this when you're doing those interviews. So you can do those interviews one-on-one as you encounter them, or you can try to organize a meetup afterwards. But I'll say you can try because sometimes they will be late. They will forget and not show up. So you do run the risk of having to wait. So that's one of those things. You have to know your partners and you have to know your situation and how big of a hurry you're in when you make that decision. Okay, next slide. Let's talk about the reporters who are a little less flexible. And while we talk about this, I believe we have another poll that I'm going to launch. Here we go. Go ahead and answer that while I'm talking. So what happens if you get that reporter that you say, hey, I can't really have you follow me. I can't do an interview right this moment, but they still follow you anyway, or they still just try to make that interview happen as you're saying that. Couple ways to approach this. First of all, think about tag teaming the assessment and the media response. If there's more than one person on the ground doing the damage assessment, maybe one person goes and collects the data, does the damage assessment, interviews the survivors, and the other person is the focal point for media, and they can point at some things, take some questions, do whatever they can do to help the media to where they're not just following you while you're trying to do your job. This could definitely work, especially if you have a bigger assessment and a lot of ground to cover. You might have enough people to make this happen. The other thing you can try to do is to get the assessment done first, because that's why you're there, right? Is to get the assessment done, get the information back to the office, and offer to walk reporters back around to point at things. Again, you do run the risk of, are they going to show up on time? Do I have to wait for them, haul them around, but at least you have your damage assessment done and you've already scoped out some locations that maybe you could take them to, point some things out, and they could, you know, have a nice shot with no people crying in the background or no dead bodies being pulled out of rubble, because that's the reality. So it's a couple of options. When you get an aggressive reporter, you do have to kind of figure out how far can you go to help them, and at what point do you just say, I'm sorry, I just can't help you. So let's look at the results here. Have you run into a reporter during a damage survey that was aggressive about getting info or following you around? The good news is there's a lot of no's here, and I'm hoping that's a good reflection of some partnerships that you've established, and that you have some media partners that are really willing to work with you. But there are several of you that said yes, so hopefully this is helpful for you. If not, don't forget we have that Q&A panel, so if you have some follow-up questions to this, definitely put it in there and Kelly and I will help you address it. And then we'll go to the next slide. And the last thing that we wanted to talk about was that whole, can we release a statement all at once? Well, one way we can do this is through a press conference. And your first thought may be, well, those don't happen very often. And you're right, they don't. But just to get us started in the press conference section, I think Andy Bailey is logged in, and we are going to ask him to tell a story about a time that he participated in a press conference. So I'll turn it over to Andy.
All right, thanks, Megan. Yeah, you're right. I've been here in Kansas City this is my 15th severe weather season, and we've only had one news conference that whole time. So they are rare, but we had an event. It was the early morning hours of May 2nd, 2008. We had a QLCS tornado event go through the Kansas City metro area, and we didn't have tornado warnings out on it. We had severe thunderstorm warnings. We were mentioning hurricane force winds directly in the warning and all that. But by not having tornado warnings out, missing the tornadoes, it did not, all of our emergency managers' siren policies were to issue them for tornado warnings, or if a tornado's been sighted, you know, kind of typical stuff, not for 80 or 85 mile an hour winds in severe thunderstorm warnings. And so this was like 2 a.m, and in the end we had 2 or 3 EF2 or EF3. I don't remember how strong they were. I think one of them might have been an EF3 tornado, moved through the north side of the Kansas City metropolitan area at like 1:30, 2 a.m. People were sleeping. The next morning, very first thing on the news, people were extremely angry. I mean, really, really angry. All the reporters that were out, you know, around sunrise, going through the rubble, just everybody was like, there was no warning. The sirens didn't go off. How can that be? And it was bad. And that whole day doing surveys, every place we went was, why wasn't there a warning? Why didn't the sirens go off? And so we decided pretty early on in the day we needed a news conference once we had wrapped up the surveys and we knew the results of the survey, as well as to address why the sirens didn't go off and why tornado warnings hadn't been issued. So I worked with the office, the folks back at the office, and put together a news conference with the county at a county facility. And at the news conference, when I spoke, just addressed pretty much every angry question I had heard that day in an opening statement, talking about it wasn't a cut and dry tornado case, you know, kind of some of the things Kelly had mentioned. The state of the science just wasn't there at the time. We had severe thunderstorm warnings out, but not a tornado warning. And I had spoken with the emergency managers previously, asking if it would be okay to discuss their siren plans, and they were totally on board with that. So I said, the reason the emergency managers didn't sound the sirens is because we didn't have tornado warnings out. So it made sure that we took the blame for that, rather than, certainly didn't want to push it off on the partners, when really it was our failing that led to that. And just addressed everything I had heard throughout the day, gave results of the survey in like 3 minutes in a statement, and then asked if there's any questions, and there weren't any questions. I was like, what? And kind of, I waited and waited, no questions. So I'm like, okay. And they started packing up their stuff and they left. And so it was extremely effective because it changed the tenor. That was like at 3 p.m. It changed the tenor of the coverage for the evening, or whatever, 5, 6 o'clock news packages locally. And it was extremely successful and did exactly what we needed to do, rather than trying to hit this one at a time and maybe missing a network or something. The news conferences worked very well because we were able to get the message out to everyone, be completely transparent and open with what went wrong, and what didn't, and it helped. It worked. We haven't had a case like that since. We've only had 1 or 2 big tornadoes since then, but everything went well. The locals didn't necessarily want to have a news conference because they were knee deep in dealing with the event, and we really didn't need it anyway. But that one time we did it, it was a huge help.
Thanks, Andy. I think you made the case right there for why or how and when news conferences or press conferences, interchangeable, can be the most effective method to get your information to the public. And in preparing your statement, you thought about and you remembered the questions that you had during the day. And that's all we're talking about. Talking points are not complicated. And they don't have to be a fancy structure in Google Docs or anything. It's just having one. I mean, I really believe in having one person give the well thought out answers. And then when everybody's tired and they're super busy and they're trying to do a million things, you've got your answers right there that are well thought out, and you don't have to do as much thinking. And I think that helps a lot. But back to news conferences. Basically, and Megan is launching a poll question, another poll question that asked how many of you have actually completed a press conference.
We've had that up for just a second, and it looks like so far a few yeses. We have right now 14 yeses. Everybody else is no, but that's pretty good. I was not expecting that high. Oh, it jumped up to 17, and we've about got everybody now. So just shy of 20 people have been part of a press conference, which is higher than I expected. I don't know about you, but I did not expect it to be that high.
No, that's good. That's great. And I'd be curious to know about your experiences, actually. So, and I wondered if anybody had actually called one, like Andy did, basically, like, we need this. But know that it is a tool to, get your information out and to answer all the questions at once. I love that story because he's like, well, we addressed everything, so there weren't any questions. Think about any of the media interviews you've done. They're kind of one-on-one, a reporter asking questions and you answering. But when you want to get the same information to everyone at once, I believe that press conferences are the best way to do that. It's also the most fair method to get information out at the same time. And we always want to be fair with all of our media partners. Also, I think a press conference makes a statement in itself. When you call, or anytime you've seen a press conference, right? Or you decide to have one, or your emergency manager decides to have one, just having one in itself says, this is important and timely information. And we want to share this. And we are working together with our partners. That's the other statement it's making. And it's also making the statement that we're the experts, right? So, and so I think one of the concerns was talking about how to control the message. Well, there's one way to control the message is to be part of a press conference. I heard that there was here's an example of a press conference. I'm sorry, I'm trying to monitor comments too. So held an informal press conference at a damage survey. It was a great time management technique. Exactly, because you're addressing everyone's question. Everyone has the same questions pretty much, right? So you're addressing them all at once. They get what they need and they go on about. Because one of the things I was thinking is that in the field, reporters, most of the time, there are always exceptions, but reporters don't need a lot. They need a little bit from you. They need you to point and say, this is, or to talk about the damage, or just to answer just a few questions, because most news stories are really short, actually, 2 to 3 minutes, right? And so they can't, it's not in their best interest to spend a ton of time with you, because that's just more editing that they have to do in the long run. So proactive, yes. Oh, hi, Tim. And called them in advance of hurricane events and just after tornado outbreaks. Yes. It gives us the credibility, exactly, we're the experts, and can quickly call and organize a press conference, which can save time. So actually, I've done them too in Norman. We've done, my first one was May 4th, 1999, the day after the May 3rd tornado and more. And I was still very new on the job, and I was just like, we need to get the message out for everybody. And also, it's a good way to take care of your local media. If it's a really big story and you're going to have national media there too, if the local media are taken care of, they can even share stuff with the national level. So, but thanks for your comments. Oh, prepare to establish a good relationship. Yes. Yes, because your county and your city PIOs know how to do a news conference. They can organize it. They have the media contacts. Yeah. Also, though, in Norman, I just had the WFO put out a PNS. We're having a news conference and people show up. So we did one in after the other Moore tornado in 2013 too. Those are the main ones. And then we've had them to announce like research projects. I've done news conferences. So let me get back to where we were. What makes a news conference different? Well, I think you all know it. Longer statements. So when we do media training with you, we always say anticipate the questions, but also let the reporters ask the questions. So you want it to be an exchange, right? They ask a question, you answer that question, and then you wait for the next question rather than saying everything you know at once, right? So in a news conference, a press conference, you really do have to anticipate the questions and answer every question in your statement. So they are longer statements, but you still don't want to go on too long. Please don't go on too long. Make it the main things and understand that in this structure, if a reporter needs more information, they can ask questions. So it's also different outlets. So you've got radio, you've got TV, you've got print, and they have different needs. So it's okay to just, again, focus on your main points, and that will probably satisfy all of them. A larger audience, right? That includes people, sometimes they're broadcast live, so that includes people watching on TV, and they are more formal than a regular interview. So there's usually, and I think it's really important to think in advance of what is your role, what is your expertise, what is somebody else going to say, what is it that I can say that is unique and for my information to share. And then we wanted to share some examples. Oh, wait, I'm ahead of myself. So locations. So I'm curious to know where you all have done press conferences. We have a few examples here. One of them is Bill Bunting down in the bottom corner, bottom right corner. That was an impromptu press conference his last week in Fort Worth before he came to the SPC. He got out of his car at an emergency manager's office the day after a tornado outbreak. And the media, several reporters saw him, and suddenly he was swarmed. So he actually just did a news conference there in the parking lot. So that can happen. And I think that was one of the examples in the chat box too. The different backdrops. I mean, it's good to have a visual backdrop. Notice the logo shirts too. We'll probably talk about that. But anyway, so I'm curious to know where you all have had them, but it could be in an office, like using the PIOs. It could be in your office. It could be out in the field. And then the structure. They all follow the same structure, and I'm sure whoever organizes it will discuss it, but you should kind of go into it assuming it's going to be the structure, right? There's opening, and they talk about, you know, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have statements, and then we're going to have questions. But typically it has statements from each of the experts, so everybody takes their turn, and you always remember the person that talked the longest, right? So don't be that person. Q&A from the press. And each expert answers. Sometimes there's multiple people who answer. And then a closing statement. And then you should hang out for any additional questions that a reporter wants to ask one-on-one. Here's our examples. So
while you're pulling that video up, we did launch another poll to ask where you have done press conferences. Obviously, there was a lot of people that said they haven't done them before, but those who have, we have 3 votes for an EM or city office, no votes for an NWS office, 4 votes for at the damage site, and other. We're getting virtual is a common thing I've seen coming up in chat, virtual press conferences. And then we did say near fire for an IMED. So a few different places we've done press conferences.
Yes. Oh gosh, and we're getting a lot more comments too. How often is it that the news director is driving the train? Very often. Most of the time, the news director, and just tells the reporter. Sometimes it's a reporter who covers weather typically, and sometimes it's a reporter who has never covered weather. So you never know what you're going to get. So sometimes there's a lot of basic talking points that you need to share as well.
In my experience, I definitely was asked, like, what's your plan? Meteorologist, how would you cover this? As like the tsunami, I was on the West Coast when that happened. I gave an idea, and the news director was like, I'm going to think about half of your idea, and then I'm going to do the rest of it this way. And that was kind of the end. Like, there was no argument. Like, that's how you had to do it.
No, the news director is the person, or the city desk at a newspaper. So now that many media outlets are turning to virtual, yes, best practices for Skype, we can do that. Yeah, I think it's basically the same. Yeah, well, let me think about that. What else you would do? And yes, it still happens to Bill Bunting. He is a rock star. Wild and fire, virtual. Yes. Okay. We'll definitely need to talk about virtual. Because that's a good point. Parking lots. Yes. I think it's great that you've worked with the county officials and EMs. And impromptu ones. Yes. I think that's the best way to not have to repeat yourself constantly. It's good time management to just have an impromptu, although you do risk if there isn't a partner who is there. If there's a partner who isn't there, then they feel left out. But that's also, you can't control that. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. So yes, on the weekends, definitely. So let me try to do this. I think this is it. You got to do it.
Emergency leaders say the twister killed 74-year-old Linda Brownlee.
Kelly, you have to switch the tab. We can't see it.
Tonight in Adair.
Oh.
There is quite a bit of damage here. Our
Okay.
farmhouse was totally destroyed in the.
I'm sorry. Okay.
There should be like a button at the top of that tab that says switch to
Yes,
this.
switch to that. Yes. Okay. Share this tab instead. Got it.
Perfect.
I think that's the right one, isn't it? Oh no, it's actually
clicked
this one.
one.
No, it's on down. Okay. Sorry, you guys.
I'm going to turn it over to Mike to answer any of your questions about
their survey. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Powell. Again, I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Des Moines. I wanted to just first of all share Bob's and emergency management
sentiments for our deepest condolences to the Brownlee family for the terrible tragedy this morning. It's the worst part of our job is to see these sort of damage, but we come out here and we survey the damage to evaluate the wind speeds and hopefully learn from an event like this. So I wanted to just provide you with some of the statistics from our storm survey that we completed. Keep in mind this is preliminary. Some of the facts may change, but this is what we found to this point. So the peak intensity of this tornado is going to be rated at EF2 at this time, and that would be peak wind speeds from approximately 120 to 130 miles per hour. The path length of this tornado was approximately 4.8 miles from beginning to end. The max width of the tornado was approximately 150 yards wide at its widest point. The time of the tornado, again, some of this could be adjusted. It appears to have begun about 1:29 a.m. Central Daylight Time, and it appeared to dissipate about 1:37 a.m. Central Daylight Time. So
All right, that kind of gives you a taste, right? I don't know that we need to watch the whole thing. So, but you know, he just dove right in. But did you notice he also expressed sympathy? I think that's important. That probably won't make it on the news, but you know, there could be somebody watching live on TV who has just lost a family member, or it's just important to remember. It also establishes your humanity, you know, and to acknowledge that before I go into this list of, you know, facts, I'm acknowledging that this is an event that affected people. So, and acknowledging our shared humanity. I think that's important. Let's try the other one.
Clayton was diagnosed with a very rare form of leukemia.
To turn it over to my warrant coordination meteorologist, Mr. Gary Conti.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. Good evening, everyone. As Ross was saying, we had a line of severe thunderstorms that swept eastward across the New York City metropolitan area. It actually produced 2 tornadoes, 1 touchdown in Brooklyn. That was the first, a weaker tornado. The second one touched down in Queens. And then we also had a significant microburst occur in Queens as well. The first tornado was a weaker tornado that developed along that line of severe thunderstorms. And that was an EF0 tornado with maximum wind gusts of 80 miles per hour. That weak tornado touched down near Park Slope, western Brooklyn.
Okay, we'll go back to the presentation, share this tab instead. Okay, are we good?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Except I can't get back to my camera. Okay, I'll figure that out in a minute. So several things, I'm sure you noticed things about that. I think they're great examples. One thing I did notice that we haven't talked about yet is being aware of, even if you're not speaking, you're probably on camera. So don't make a face, you know, just, you know, stand like you're a choir member, right? With your arms on your sides. So, so how do you create a statement? So you want to think about what is the most important thing that people should know, right? And that is, okay, I know UF means up first. What is it, Megan?
Bottom line up front.
Bottom line, thank you. Sorry, you guys. Anyway, so bottom line up front. So, and then also think about, don't waste people's time with a lot of preliminary information. Just get to the point quickly, just like those examples. Then also think about what is the information that you are expected to share. What is your expertise? What is the information that you have that nobody else has? That should go up first too. And then you also want to talk with other speakers, maybe in advance, so that you kind of know your role already, but it's very clear what each person is going to talk about. All right, now we are Megan's going to talk about speaking tips.
And I wanted to bring up something that just popped into chat, was that this should not be the first time that your partners hear something. That is a great point, Jim. Thank you for saying that. Like, coordination on what you're going to talk about at that press conference is huge. Do not surprise your partners. They will remember that. So now that Kelly's kind of given you the overview of how this works, let's talk about some techniques for both speaking and for presentation. So starting with speaking, you should always, regardless of what presentation you're giving or media interview that you're giving, you should always speak with a pace that's easy to follow, without being boring. There's definitely an art to that takes a lot of practice, but there's an extra consideration with press conferences, and that a lot of times organizations are doing a great job bringing in a sign language interpreter to sign as you speak, but take it easy on them, especially if you're someone that talks quickly when you get nervous. Add some extra pauses in there. Work on slowing yourself down. So that way the sign language interpreter isn't too far behind what you're talking about and they can keep up. Now, of course, they are well trained and very good at what they do, but just give them a break and add a few extra seconds of pause here and there, and it'll help them out greatly. The other thing to think about is most press conferences are live, right? That's kind of the point, to get the information out quickly. And that means there's no do-overs, there's no mulligans, there's no, oh, I messed that up, can we stop and retake that question? You just have to err with grace, and hopefully not err at all, but we're not perfect. And you have to learn how to just keep moving forward if you do mess up. The one thing I'll say is a lot of times if you just stumble on your words, you just kind of move forward. But if you say something and as you stumble, you make it inaccurate, you need to fix that. You need to correct with the accurate term if you misspoke and said the wrong term. And another reason to do that, not just because it's live and you might be broadcasted live, is sometimes there's people like live tweeting or like they're on Facebook typing up the things that you are saying so people can follow along on social media. So if you don't correct that, then it's not going to make it out into internet world either. And we definitely don't want to propagate that misinformation. And then the last thing we have here is about the Q&A. So when the Q&A happens, there's going to be different reporters or press or people asking questions. And most of the time, unless it's a really tiny room, you're not going to be able to hear that reporter's question from the people watching, like their perspective. So it's a good idea to give that context as part of your answer. So whether that's just straight up repeating the question or just incorporating the question into the beginning of your answer, you need to give context because the people at home probably couldn't hear that reporter's question. And then it's not just an out of the blue statement of what are they even talking about or answering at the moment. So definitely give that context. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so it's a soapbox moment. Many of you, I mean, I know there's like 100 people on here, but many of you have met me before. And you know, one of my biggest pet peeves is the fig leaf. If you have not heard of the fig leaf before, this is when you stand with your hands in front of you and your hands are in front of your private region. All this does is block off your body language, make you look terrified, and it draws your eyes to the private region, which we definitely don't want in a press conference or any time for that matter. So this photo was provided by John Pagliarello. I thought I saw him on this call, but I'm not sure if he is. He's nice enough to let me use him as an example. If you don't know him, he is a WCM from Columbia, South Carolina. He's the guy in the white polo shirt. Lots of people in this photo are standing there in the fig leaf position, and everyone looks a little intimidated, and you kind of really notice. I mean, I'm going to show my age a little bit, but there used to be this show on MTV that I won't say its name, and the people on the show like to bonk each other in that region, and they all stood around as a result with their hands covering it. That's what I think of when I see photos like this. We don't want that. It's very distracting. So alternatives. You can just rest your hands to the side. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't look lazy. You don't look bored. Rest your hands to the side. If you are a little bit more shy about your body and you just really want to cover it a little bit for, you know, comfort's sake, just raise your hands up a little bit. Put it belt level instead of private level, and that's going to make a big difference. If you have something that you're holding on to, don't use it as a shield. That's when you definitely want to put your hands off to the side. I have seen people put their hands behind their backs. It does look a little weird if you have short sleeve shirt on, but otherwise, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, that's a military stance. I think it's perfectly appropriate. So, end of soapbox, don't fig leaf. I will call you if I see you fig leaf on live television, just to let you know. I have done it to probably 2 of you on this call. Okay, something else to consider. You're going to be standing for a while. Kelly brought this up. This means know what you're going to wear and that it's not something you're going to be tugging at the whole time because it's uncomfortable. If you need comfortable shoes, that's something to consider as well. Your face has to be on television possibly for a while. So you don't want to look goofy or tired or sleepy or, you know, really stern. Nice neutral face. If you can manage an empathetic face, especially as those empathetic phrases are being spoken by your partners that are also speaking, that's great, but you don't have to be that way the whole time. Just a neutral face is fine. Just look professional and know that you are being seen. Outfits, we did talk about this a little. You can never go wrong with logo gear. Like I highly recommend logo gear. Usually it's more comfortable if you're out assessing and then you immediately go to a press conference after. It's going to work out for you. If you're not a fan of logo gear, don't have logo gear, just business casual is appropriate. Again, this picture is a great example. The elected officials are obviously dressed up a little bit more in this photo, but those who are not elected officials, they're wearing either logo gear or business casual sort of dress. Just look clean and put together. If for some reason you've got a little dirty and you're going straight from damage assessment to press conference, just know that maybe it's a good idea to have something clean that you can change into. We did talk a little bit also about there's no do-overs, and the performance side of this is I've noticed as I've done interviews over the past several years that a lot of us like to giggle when we mess up. That's something we don't want to do in a press conference, especially when people have lost homes, possibly lives. So if you are someone that you don't know how you react when you mess up, take a moment with a partner, a coworker, in a mirror, and just think about things to say. Try to go off the cuff, improv, and see what happens when you mess up. A lot of people giggle. Some people get angry at themselves. You can't do that. So you want to learn how to error with grace, and you don't want to show it in your face that you're panicking because you just messed up, or that you're giggling because you just messed up. And then something that Kelly and I always try to find a way to incorporate in any media training that we give, everything is on the record. There's no off the record, everything is on the record. So if you do not want it printed or recorded or put on television, don't say it. Everything is on the record. And there are reporters that will try to get you to talk off the record. Just don't do it. There is no good result from this. We could probably talk about this for hours. Just don't go off the record. And next slide. Okay, so that is the end of our slide deck. Before we move on, we're going to have time for questions at the end that we can really dive into some of these other topics. But before we move on, do you have questions for Kelly and I that you want answered before we go into a break and then an activity?
And I want to jump in here, Megan, and give a couple tips on virtual. All right. Background is really important. And so I'd rather you have a plain wall than a really busy, like no stacks of papers behind you. I mean, I'm a stacker, but you don't see that right now, right? And I have a logo, right? I work for NOAA Comms, so I have a NOAA logo. NOAA logo is what I prefer because that's where we get our funding, right? However, I understand the loyalty and desire for a Weather Service logo. And I think if you're doing like a damage assessment, probably Weather Service logo is the appropriate logo. But try to have a logo behind you or a logo shirt, right, for virtual. Also, I have a light here. Oh, look at that. So you can do a background. Hi, Michael. Yeah, that looks good because you've got both the NOAA and the Weather Service logos. So I also have a light that I use, all right? And you can see with and without light. I also have a pretty bright room, but I do have just this little light. It's a Lume Cube, and I have a little thing that helps it stay on top of my monitor. And so for any calls, I have my little light. But you do want to think about your lighting. Please don't be in shadows. Don't and overhead light is not good. You want light. And also I have a lamp here too. See my lamp. Okay. So you can use just a regular lamp if you don't want to buy a light, but do have good lighting. That makes all the difference. Okay. And I think that's all on virtual. I mean, I think virtual really does require a little bit more coordination because you're not just standing there and can turn to each other and say, okay, you're next kind of thing. You need to kind of have a plan. And even then, like a Google Doc or some kind of shared document, like Megan put together for us a run of show, right? And so we have our notes and we know I printed it out because I'm old fashioned, but I also just in case there was something that went wrong on my screen, I would have the printout right here so that that we also have that kind of guiding us. And I believe, what about looking at the camera? Yes. Absolutely look at the camera and try to position. I don't always succeed. It's really hard because you definitely want to look at your screen, but try to have your camera in a way where you can kind of look at your screen and not look like you're looking down. You don't want to be looking down for sure. But if you possibly can in an interview or when you're making your statement, you want to stare at that camera. I always say, if you need to pretend someone you love is standing right behind that camera, right? So that it kind of helps to envision a person. It makes it a little bit easier to stare at that, but you definitely want to look at the camera. So thank you, Kelly. I actually had a Bluetooth microphone that I like to use, but I gave it to Bill Bunting because he was doing a lot of interviews at the end of March after the tornadoes. And so I felt like it was more important for him to have the better microphone than me. So I'm just using the microphone on my camera. But if you have a Bluetooth microphone, I highly recommend that. It makes your sound better. And avoids feedback. Yes. I actually put a person's picture next to the webcam. Yes. Do whatever it takes to help you maintain that eye contact, because this looks a lot better than this or this. You know, I mean, you've got to look at that camera. It's so important with virtual. Put a set of eyes that works too. Yeah. Whatever technique works for you. Anyway, Megan, did you have anything to add on that, on the virtual?
We have a couple of really quick little one-pagers that during our break and before the end of the session, I will get you a couple of links. We have like some Skype tips that include things that Kelly has mentioned, like, you know, look at the camera and lighting and that sort of thing. And also we do have a Facebook Live handout. I don't know how much it's specifically about virtual like press conferences, but that's definitely something we have a handout for, so we can get a couple of links shared for you. The only other thing I would say is when you're doing a virtual press conference, something like a Facebook Live, I feel like I really enjoy the ones that don't start exactly on time, but instead they have some filler things to put at the beginning, whether it's just announcing every once in a while, hey, you know, since this is a Facebook Live, we are going to let people roll in and continue to log in for about 1 or 2 extra minutes. We will get started at 2 after the hour. You know, and then when you get to the end, like people, unlike a press conference, when you might turn it on television, you're going to watch it, you might turn it off and then walk away. A lot of times in Facebook Live, people kind of come in at some points, they might log in 10 minutes later. So a recap at the end, or to tell people where they can get the information afterwards, is really helpful, because a lot of the times I've noticed people miss good chunks of your Facebook Live. They just get distracted by other things on the internet. So maybe making sure that you know to tell people at the end where to get the information that they might have missed at the beginning.
Yes, and mute your cell phone. That's always a good, wherever you are for an interview, virtual or not. And then there was another, and yes, please, that's in our normal media training. Avoid acronyms, use plain language. Just assume your audience does not know that much, because maybe they don't. I always use my mom as an example. She's a very intelligent person, but she's not a meteorologist, right? So pretend you're talking to, you know, your cousin or your mom or your grandma or something. So
we actually learned at my last station that there is a large demographic of children who are the carriers of science information in their home. And we noticed that most with weather segments, kids really tune in. And the median audience ended up being like 10 to 12-year-olds, and usually women. You know, so it was interesting to see that, you know, we talk over and over in media training, like, you got to talk to the lowest common denominator so everyone can understand your message. And think about the kids that are watching this information. I mean, I know when I was in school, we had to do social study reports, and we had to watch the news and the next day report on it. There's kids out there doing that. So we definitely want to explain our jargon, our acronyms, and not use anything we can avoid. I mean, using EF, we kind of have to, because that's our rating scale, but we need to give context when we do it.
all right.
Well, should we take a break? think we've been here for a bit. Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back to after. I guess we're all in Central Time, right? So at 11:10, and we'll see you here soon.